Hi, third graders. Today we are here ready to work on lesson 18 of our unit 5, continuing to work along with fractions. So you will need your pencil and you will need your lesson 18 problem set, which looks like that. So today we are going to be comparing fractions, two fractions on a number line and saying if they are greater than, less than, or equal to each other. Okay, let's take a look at our objective and I can statement for today. So there's a lot of stuff in the middle there we don't need to pay attention to. So we're just going to look at the first part and then the last part. So the first part says we are going to compare fractions and whole numbers on the number line by reasoning about their distance from zero. So we know if a fraction is really close to zero, pages are stuck together. If a fraction is closer to zero, then it's going to be smaller than a fraction that is closer to one whole. Okay, so the closer a fraction is to zero, obviously it's going to be smaller than a fraction that would be closer to one whole. Okay, our I can statement, I can compare fractions by thinking about their distance from zero. So again, just thinking about fractions on a number line, and the closer they are to zero, that means they are going to be less than the other fraction that would be further along down the number line. Okay, so put your name and date on your problem set if you haven't already, and then show me that you're ready to go. Alrighty, our directions. So if you'll put your finger or your pencil on the directions, and you can follow along right with me. And it says to place the two fractions on the number line. Circle the fraction with the distance closest to zero, then compare using greater than, less than, or equal to. The first problem is done for you. So if we look at number 1, here's our two fractions that we're comparing. We're going to be comparing 1/4 and 3/4. So let's look at our denominators. What is the denominator? Remember, denominator, D down, it's the number on the bottom. So our denominator is 4 for both fractions. Okay, so they split the number line up into 4s. I have 1, 2, 3, 4. They didn't do a very good job of labeling the pieces, so let's go ahead and label those. Okay, so we'll just do it down here since they have some stuff up there. Okay, so at 0, we know that it would be 0/4. Then this would be 1/4, and this would be 2/4, 3/4, and at 1 whole would be 4/4. Remember yesterday our lesson, if I'm at a whole, I can stop and check and say 4 divided by 4 equals 1. Yes, I know that I'm correct. Okay, so we are comparing 1/4, so I'm going to put a point on 1/4. And then the other fraction that we're comparing is 3/4. So here is 3/4 right here. Which fraction is closest to 0, 1/4 or 3/4? 1/4, right? So that means that 1/4 is less than 3/4. If we think of our little alligator, right? The mouth is open towards the bigger fraction. So it's open towards the 3/4 because it wants to eat the bigger piece. If you want to eat a candy bar, do you want the smaller piece or do you want your mouth open to gobble up the bigger piece? You want to eat that bigger piece, right? So again, the mouth is open towards the bigger piece and the small point is pointing towards the smaller piece. 1/4 is less than 3/4. Alrighty, let's look at number 2. So for number 2, we're comparing 2/6 and 3/6. Let's look at our denominators. The number down on the bottom, let's circle those denominators, 6 and 6. They're both a 6. So I know that my number line is going to be split up into 6 pieces. Do you remember the trick for splitting them up into equal 6? What do I split it into first? First of all, I'm going to cut it into thirds. So 2 lines gives me 1, 2, 3 equal pieces needed to make a whole. And then once I have my 3 equal pieces, I'm going to split those 3 pieces in half. And that gives me nice equal six nice equal pieces. So let's just check. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Good. Let's label. So at 0, I automatically know that my denominator is going to be what? 6. That tells me right there, right? So 6 is my denominator, okay? And I'm at 0, so I know that my numerator is going to be 0. So 0, 6. And then if you want to pause it and just finish filling that out, you can definitely do that, okay? 0, 6, 1, 6, 2, 6, 3, 6, 6, 5, 6, and 6, 6. And I'm going to stop because I'm at a whole. And 6 divided by 6 is 1. 1 goes into 6 one time. So I know that I am correct there. Okay, but I'm not done. I want to compare those fractions, right? The first one I have is 2, 6. So I'm going to put a point right on 2, 6. And then the second one we have is 3, 6, which is right here. Okay, and I want to know which fraction. So it wants me to say, circle the fraction with the distance closest to 0. Which one is closest to 0, 2, 6 or 3, 6? Which one is closest to 0? 2, 6, right? So go ahead and circle it. 2, 6 is closest to 0. So that means that 2, 6 is greater than, less than, or equal to 3, 6. It is less than, right? Because it's closer to 0. So 2, 6 is less than. So the small point is pointing towards the smaller fraction, and the mouth is open towards eating that bigger fraction, right? It wants to eat that 3, 6. Good. What do you think so far? You okay? All right. So look at number 3. Look at the two fractions there, and do you notice anything different about the fractions in number 3? What do you think? What do you notice about those two fractions in number 3? Did you notice that they have different denominators? The number down in the bottom is different, right? So we have 1/2, so we have a denominator of 2, and then we have 1/4, so we have a denominator of 4. So we're going to have to show two different parts of our number line, right? So we'll have it split into halves, and then we're going to have to split our number line into fourths. Which one should we split it into first, halves or fourths? We could split it into halves first, right? Because we know that if we're trying to split it into equal fourths, we can first split it into half, and let's split the halves in half. That gives us fourths. So let's split it in half first, and let's go ahead and label the halves. So let's have the bottom be halves, and then we'll label the top as fourths. Okay, so if we're going to do halves on the bottom, so we have 0, so that would be 0 halves. And then what would this one be? 1/2. And then this would be 2 halves. And I'm going to stop and do a check because I'm at a whole. What's 2 divided by 2? 1. So I know that's correct, right? Okay, so here's 1/2. So I'm going to put a point right there. That's my halves. Now I want to do fourths. And let me grab a different color. So I will do the fourths in green. Okay, let me just make sure. Yep, that works. Okay, so we have 1/4. So I want to split my number line up into fourths. And we know that when we split into fourths, a good trick is to first to cut it in half, which is already cut in half, and then cut the halves in half. If you want to get a colored pencil, you can. If you think that would be helpful, just like I am. So I'm doing the fourths in green just to show the different color there. So let's label the top. So now these are fourths, so I know that my denominator is going to be a 4. What would my numerator be at for the very first one? Well, since I'm at 0, it would be 0/4. Okay, so we have 0/4, and then the next one would be 1/4. Do I skip this one or do I label it? I would label it, right? Because remember, for fourths, I cut it in half and then cut the halves in half. So I'm still going to use this. So I have 0/4, 1/4, and then I have 2/4. What do you notice about 2/4? 2/4 is equal to a half, right? And do you remember we talked about if the numerator, the number on top, is half of the denominator, that means that it's equal to a half. So 2 is half of 4. I could also say double 2 and I get 4. That is a clue to me that that fraction is equal to a half. And let's actually look right up here. So here's 1/2 and 2/4. Ooh, what do we have right there? 3/6. So what do you think 3/6 is equal to? A half as well, right? Because these are all lining up at 1/2 on the number line. And 3 is half of 6. If I double 3, I get 6. So again, another clue that 3/6 is equal to a half. If 3 is half of 6, that's a half. I can say 3 plus 3 is 6, another way to tell me that it's equal to a half, right? And again, if I keep going up even more, there's 2/4 again, which I have right there. So this whole chunk right here, all these fractions are equal to 1/2. Good. And if you worked carefully to split your number line up as well, they should line up pretty equally there at 1/2 as well. But I'm so off track, but I really wanted to point that out because that's very important. So let's start back at 0/4 and we'll count up to finish filling in these 2/4. So we're at 0/4, 1/4, 2/4. This would be 3/4, and then this would be 4/4. And I'm at a whole, so I would stop and check. What's 4 divided by 4? 1. So check. Okay. And then I want to put the fraction that we were putting on the number line here is 1/4. So let's put a point there in 1/4. And remember, when we put the points on the number line, they're not floating. It's pretty much right between where those 2 points meet, like where that right in the middle of that plus sign. Okay, so then the question says, or it tells us to circle the fraction with the distance closest to 0. So which one is closest to 0, 1/4 or 1/2? 1/4. So let's circle 1/4. It's closest to 0. So that means that 1/2 is less than or greater than 1/2. 1/4 is less than. But let's look here. The first one they have here is 1/2. So that means 1/2 is greater than 1/4, right? Since 1/2 is further, 1/2 is closer to 1 whole. That means that 1/2 is greater than 1/4. What do you think? Okay, let's look at the next one. Look at number 4. What do you notice about the fractions for number 4? The denominators are different again, right? The denominators are different. Did you notice that? So for the first one, we have 2/3. And then for the second fraction, we have 2/6. So we have thirds and 6. So we're going to do like we did above. Let's make the bottom of the number line thirds, and we'll make the top of the number line 6. Okay? Because if you remember, if we start with thirds, and then if we're trying to get equal 6, our trick is that we cut it into thirds, and then we cut the thirds in half, and then we get equal 6. So that'll be good for us to do that. So we'll do thirds on the bottom. So to get thirds, I'm going to put 2 lines, right? And that gives me 1, 2, 3. And then we'll label our thirds first, and we'll plot our point for 2/3 before we do the 6 so we don't get confused. If we try to do it all at once, it gets confusing. All right, so let's label our thirds at the bottom. So we're at 0, so this would be 0/3. And then this would be 1/3. This would be 2/3. And last you would have 3/3, which is equal to a whole. And again, I'm going to stop and check since I'm at a whole, and I say 3 divided by 3 equals 1. Again, if my numerator and denominator are the same, I know that the fraction is equal to 1 whole. So check. Okay. 0/3, 1/3, 2/3, 3/3, and we want to put a point at 2/3. So go ahead and do that. Put a point on your number line on 2/3. Okay. If you need to pause it and get caught up on any of that, you can definitely do that. I'm going to switch colors. So if you have another, like a colored pencil, this would be good for you to take out that other color now. And we're going to do 6 on the top of the number line. So we have 2, 6, but remember if we're working on splitting into 6, I first cut it in thirds, and then I cut the thirds in half. So we already have the thirds, and we're now going to cut the thirds in half. Okay, and then I'm going to check and make sure I have 6 equal pieces. You do that too. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Good. If you need to pause it, you can do that. And then when you come back together, we'll label the 6. So at the top, we're at 0. So it would be 0 over what? 6 would be my denominator, so 0, 6. And then we would have 1, 6, right? 2, 6. 3, 6. Oh, what do I know about 3, 6? 3, 6 is equal to 1/2, right? 3 is half of 6, so I know that it's equal to a half. So I'm at 3, 6, and then this one right here would be 4, 6, and then I have 5, 6, and then I have 6, 6. And I'm going to pause. I'm going to box it because I'm at a whole. and I'm going to stop and check. 6 divided by 6 is 1, because 6 goes into 6 one time. Check, I know that I'm correct with that. All right, so 2, 6. Let's put a point on 2, 6. So that would go right there. Okay. So we want to circle the fraction with a distance closest to 0. So which fraction that we put the points on, 2, 6 or 4, 6? Or sorry, 2, 6 or 2/3 would be closer to 0. 2, 6 is closer to 0. We can also see from our number line that 2, 6 is equal to 1/3, right? And 4, 6 is equal to 2/3. So this is kind of neat to see how the thirds and the 6 line up with equal fractions, right? Okay, so 2, 6 is closer to 0. Is 2/3 bigger, greater than, or is 2/3 smaller, less than 2, 6? 2/3 is greater than. So the mouth is open to eat the bigger piece. It wants the bigger piece of chocolate, right? 2/3 is greater than 2, 6. All right. If you need to pause it to finish up, you can. And let's look at number 5. Okay. So for number 5, go ahead and take a look at that and tell me if you notice anything different about number 5 than the rest. They do have different denominators. We have 8 and we have 4. I want you to notice, there's 2 other things that I want you to notice here. What other 2 things do you notice is maybe a little bit different here? Did you notice that it starts with 1 instead of 0, right? The rest of these started with 0, and we ended with 1. Here we're starting with 1 whole and we're ending with 2 wholes. Good, so that's the second thing I wanted you to notice. So different denominators. We're starting with 1 whole this time and we're ending with 2 wholes. Do you notice anything else that's different this time? This time, our numerators are bigger than our denominators. The numerator, the number on top, is bigger than our denominator, which tells us that these are fractions that are greater than a whole, which is why we're having to start with 1 whole and we're ending with 2 wholes. Okay, as long as the number on top is bigger than the number on the bottom, that means this fraction is going to be bigger than 1 whole. Okay, so let's see here. We have fourths and we have eighths. So let's make the bottom, we'll do the bottom as fourths, right? Because we can do fourths and then we can cut our fourths in half to get eighths there, right? So to do fourths, what's my trick to get really good fourths? Cut it in half, cut the halves in half. That gives me fourths, right? Now I need to label this first one. Am I going to put 0 over 4? No, I'm not going to do that this time because I'm starting with 1 whole. So I know that my denominator is going to be a 4. My number on the bottom is a 4. What would my numerator be if it's going to be equal to a whole? Did you say 4? Remember, if it's going to be equal to a whole, that means my numerator and denominator are the same. Okay, so we have 4 fourths there. So let's keep labeling. You want to pause it and finish labeling. So once we have the first one done, that's pretty much the hardest part, and then the easiest, that it's easier just to keep going from there. Okay, so if you want to pause it and finish, you can. Make sure to check when you get to the whole. 4 fourths, 5 fourths, 6 fourths, 7 fourths, and 8 fourths. And I'm going to put a box around it because we're at a whole. And I'm going to do a check. So I'm going to say to myself, what is 8 divided by 4? 4, 8. 4 goes into 8 twice. I'm at 2 wholes. Check, I know that I'm correct. Okay, and I'm going to put a point at 7 fourths. Okay, so here's 7 fourths, and then we want to do eighths. So take your other color, take a colored pencil, and now I want to split our number line into eighths. We already have it in fourths, so what would I do to my number line and my fourths to get eighths now? I'm going to cut those in half, right? And once I do that, I'm going to just count my spaces and make sure I had 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Good. and I need to label, right? So I know, what would my denominator be? It's going to be an 8, right? Because I'm talking about 8s right here. If it's equal to a whole, what's my numerator going to be? Remember down here, so we had fourths, and it's equal to a whole, so my numerator was 1. I'm still at 1 whole. My denominator is 8, so what's my numerator going to be? An 8 as well. Because if it's a fraction that's going to be equal to a whole, my numerator and denominator are the same. Okay, so now it's going to be pretty easy peasy to go ahead and fill in the rest. So go ahead and pause your video and finish filling in those 8s. Put a point on 11 8s, and then put your symbol in there, greater than, less than, or equal to, okay? So pause and finish this problem up for me. All right, let's see how you did. So we started out with 8 8s at 1 whole. So then we had 9 8s, 10 8s, 11 8s, 12 8s, and you should have boxed that one. Oh, no, I'm sorry. What am I talking about? We're not boxing that one. Just kidding. 12 8s, 13 8s, 14 8s, 15 8s, 16 8s. There's where you're going to box. 16 8s. So we stopped there. So that's equal to 2 wholes, or it should be. So that's why we're going to check 16 divided by 8 equals 2. So I know that we're correct. I don't know what was even in my brain right there for that one. I guess I was just thinking because they matched up, but it's still equal to a whole. Good. So 8 8s, 9 8s, 10 8s, 11 8s, 12 8s, 13 8s, 14 8s, 15 8s, and 16 8s. And we did our check there because we have 2 wholes. 16 divided by 8 equals 2, so we are correct. Let's put a point on 11 8s, which is right here. So here's 11 8s, and then here is 14 8s, or 7 fourths is what we were comparing it to. So 7 fourths and 11 8s. And then again, our question that we're asking ourselves is, which fraction has a distance closest to 0? So which is closer to 0, 11 8s or 7 fourths? 11 8s. So circle 11 8s. So 11 8s, which symbol is going to go in there? Or hopefully you already did it. Greater than, less than, or equal to 7 fourths. 11 8s is less than 7 fourths. Good. Go ahead and flip it over. All right. Here's what I'm going to tell you. We are going to do number 6, and then we are going to cross out 7 and 8. We've been working hard today. I think number 6 will be good to finish up our lesson today. Sound good? Okay. So let's read through number 6. Go ahead and put your finger or your pencil on Joanne, and will you read this right out loud with me? Okay, here we go. Joanne and Lupe live straight down the street from their school. Joanne walks 5-6 miles, and Lupe walks 7-8 miles home from school every day. Draw a number line to model how far each girl walks. Who walks the least? Explain how you know using pictures, numbers, and words. Okay, so I'm going to kind of go through again and pull out the important information this time. So Joanne and Lupe live right down the street from their school. There's nothing there that I need to put parentheses around. Joanne walks 5-6 miles. Is that important? Definitely. So Joanne walks 5-6 miles. So I'm going to put a bracket or parentheses around there. Lupe walks 7-8 miles from home. That's important too. Okay. And it says draw a number line to model how far each girl walks. And then my question says, who walks the least? So closest to 0. Remember, we're doing number lines. It's asking us to do number lines. So it says who walks the least, so that'll be closest to 0. And then it says explain, which means we need words, how you know using pictures, numbers, and words. Alrighty. So I'm going to actually, instead of trying to do 2 number lines this time, instead of trying to do 1 number line this time, I'm going to do 2 to kind of make it easier. So why don't you do this with me? So here's our first number line. And this is going to be Joanne. And then I'm going to give myself enough space and then do a second number line under there. Don't put it down too far because you need to be able to label it. Make sure that your number lines are the same size, okay? Because the whole should start at the same size. So Joanne, and then this will be L for Lupe. Okay, they're both going to start with 0. And let's look at this. Are any of these fractions going to be greater than a whole? 5, 6, and 7/8. Neither of them are greater than 1 whole, right? I would know if it was greater than a whole because my numerator would be bigger than my denominator. If this was if this was 7/6, and if this was 10/8, then these fractions would be greater than a whole. But because 5 is smaller than 6 and 7 is smaller than 8, neither of these fractions are greater than 1 whole. So I'm going to end both of my number lines at 1. Make sure that they are both starting at the same place on the number line as 0. So I made mine so the zeros line up, and then also the ones are going to line up because I want them to be equal. Remember, if they don't start out, remember that lesson with the pizzas? One pizza was small and somebody ate a half, and then another pizza started out large and somebody ate a fourth, and it looked like that 1/4 was larger than a half because that chunk was bigger, but it's only because their pizza was bigger to start out with. So if we're going to compare fractions, the wholes need to be the same size to start out with. Okay, so let's do Joanne first. So Joanne walks 5, 6 miles. Okay, so Joanne walks 5, 6. I'm going to put 5, 6 at the end of my number line there. Okay, now this denominator tells me that this whole is going to be split up into how many equal parts? 6. Now remember, for 6, what do I split it into first? Split it into thirds first. Okay, and then split the thirds in half. Okay, and then we're ready to label. So at 0, at top I would put 0 over 6, right? Because I know that my denominator is 6. I split it up into 6 equal parts. So 0, 6. Then we would have 1, 6, 2, 6, 3, 6. What is 3, 6 equal to again? 1/2, right? Because 3 is half of 6. So after 3, 6 is 4, 6, 5, 6, and 6, 6. I'm at 1 whole, so I stop and check. 6 divided by 6 equals 1. So I know that I'm correct. And Joanne walks 5, 6. So let's put a point on 5, 6. I'm going to do Lupe in my other color. So you can use your colored pencil. All right, so for Lupe, she walks 7/8. So let's put 7/8 right there. Okay, and to get 8ths, I'm going to first of all split it in half. I'm going to split my halves in half, and that gives me 4ths. And then my 4ths, I'm going to cut those in half to get 8ths. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, and then I'm going to label. So these are 8ths, right? So this would be 0/8, 1/8, 2/8, 3/8, 4/8, 5/8, 6/8, 7/8, and 8/8. That's equal to a whole. And I know 8 divided by 8, numerator and denominator are the same. 8 divided by 8 equals 1. Okay, and where is 8/8? It's right here. This is really close, okay, but which one is closer to, we want to know, what's the question again? Who walks the least? So who walks the least? Which one is closest to 0? It's really, really, really close, but Joanne walks the least because 5, 6 is a little bit closer to 0 than 7/8. If I just kind of go up, boop, 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 boop. It's right before, but it is super close, right? Draw a number line to model who walks the least. So I don't know about you, but I don't have any room left to write. So if we just kind of discuss it, Joanne walks the least because her point is closer to 0, even though they are super, super, super close. And we also have our number lines to show that. Because 8s are a little bit smaller, because there's more pieces, that's why 7/8 is even closer there. These pieces here would be a little bit bigger, the 6. Remember a candy bar, the smaller the denominator, the bigger the piece, right? All right, guys, so I told us that as a treat for working so hard today, we are going to cross out 7 and 8. We did a good job today. We were comparing fractions, some with like denominators and some with different denominators, okay? So super work today on our fractions, and I will see you tomorrow.